Welcome to the Thinking Stack. Today, we're diving headfirst into a question that feels a bit like poking a sleeping bear, a very existential bear.
Mm-hmm.
Do we lie to ourselves to survive?
Oof. Yeah, that's uncomfortable.
Right. It's unsettling because if the answer is yes, then what are our beliefs even built on? What's the bedrock?
It's the ultimate reality check, isn't it? We like to think our internal world, maps onto the external one pretty well.
Sure, we hope so.
But this question, it forces us to ask if those maps are maybe heavily distorted for our own comfort or even just to function, to survive.
Exactly. So to really get our hands dirty with this, we're using our integrated thinking stack, 7 layers of perspective to really dissect this unsettling core idea. We're talking about that fundamental human thing, meaning making, how our brains try to knit together something coherent from all the chaos.
Yeah, finding those glimmers of control, creating a narrative.
But here's the sneaky part, right? That need for meaning, it doesn't always prioritize truth, like actual objective truth.
Not at all. Our brains are fundamentally pattern-seeking machines. And sometimes a really compelling story, even if it's factually full of holes, it can feel much more psychologically stabilizing, at least in the moment.
So yeah, prepare for some, let's say, cognitive friction.
Definitely.
Because this deep dive, it's designed to challenge those cozy little narratives we all tend to carry around.
Consider your intellectual seatbelt fastened.
Okay, let's drop into layer 1, cognitive cleanse. The big question here is what's actually real versus what we want to be real or what we fear is real.
Or just assume, right. What we assume is real in this whole meaning-making game.
Exactly.
It's about trying to strip away the layers of interpretation, the bias, as much as we possibly can.
Which is hard.
It's very hard. Humans have this deep-seated need to create narratives. It's just how we understand our place in the world.
Right.
But, as the research suggests, this storytelling, it's often deeply tangled up with self-deception. We have this powerful, often unconscious tendency to shape our stories.
To fit what we want or what we're scared of.
Exactly. To fit our desires or our anxieties.
It's like we're all unreliable narrators in our own lives, constantly editing,
polishing the story,
making it more palatable or maybe more heroic. And Robert Travers, he had this really provocative idea in The Folly of Fools, didn't he?
Oh yeah, Travers.
That this self-deception isn't just some accidental glitch in the system.
No, he argued it's an actual evolutionary advantage.
How so?
Well, the idea is it helps us sell our lies to other people more convincingly.
By believing them ourselves first.
Precisely. If you're genuinely convinced you don't leak those little tells, those subtle cues of deception, you fool yourself first.
That's the ultimate poker face.
It really is. You become a more effective social operator.
It sounds a bit cynical, maybe, but you can see the Darwinian logic there.
Definitely. And von Hippel and Travers, later on, they suggested this self-deception might even free up cognitive resources.
Ah, okay. How does that work?
Well, think about it. It's less mentally taxing to just believe your own story
than constantly juggling the truth and the lie.
Exactly. Then keeping track of the fabrication. Maintaining a consistent, even if inaccurate narrative just simplifies things.
Right. Less mental bandwidth used up.
Allows us to navigate social stuff more smoothly, maybe even perform better, like they argued, because we're not bogged down in those internal contradictions.
Okay. Then you have someone like Viktor Frankl. His line from Man's Search for Meaning, it's incredibly powerful. Those who have a why to live can bear almost any how.
Such a profound statement.
And in this context, what's striking is that why? It doesn't have to be objectively true, does it?
No, not at all. It doesn't need universal acknowledgement. It just needs to be a powerful enough personal narrative.
Powerful enough to pull you through the tough stuff.
Exactly. Meaning, in that survival context, isn't about factual accuracy. It's about subjective force. Its power is in providing purpose, resilience, a reason to keep going.
Even if the reason itself wouldn't hold up under scrutiny.
Right. Regardless of objective scrutiny, survival, psychological, and sometimes physical, can hinge on this really personal why, even if it's built on, let's say, a somewhat shaky foundation of truth.
So the uncomfortable insight from this first layer is almost backwards from what we might expect.
How do you mean?
That at the very core of how we function, meaning isn't necessarily about lining up with objective reality. Truth, at this basic level of just psychological survival, it can be, well, optional.
Precisely. It forces us to distinguish, doesn't it, between how our brain processes stuff for immediate psychological needs, coherence, survival, and a more detached analytical search for objective truth.
Yeah.
And this initial cognitive flexibility, this potential for self-deception, it really sets the stage for the ethical minefield we're about to step into.
Which brings us neatly to layer 2,
Mm-hmm.
moral intelligence. Okay, now we shift the lens. We look at the ethics of it. Is this comfortable lie, this fiction that helps us out personally, is it actually morally okay? Especially when it starts affecting how we treat other people or how we engage with the world.
This is where the personal justification really bumps up against the collective good, isn't it?
Yeah, the friction point.
Self-deception might offer individual comfort, maybe even a perceived edge, but it can have really significant moral consequences.
Like when?
Well, if our self-deception leads us to rationalize harmful actions or to ignore injustice, or maybe even dehumanize others,
Yeah.
then its moral status is definitely in the red zone.
Sartre's idea of bad faith seems incredibly relevant here.
Absolutely.
That act of, consciously or not, deceiving ourselves to avoid facing uncomfortable truths, to dodge responsibility.
It feels like a kind of ethical laziness, doesn't it?
Yeah, choosing the warm blanket of the lie over the cold, hard edges of reality.
Bad faith is essentially a moral cop-out. By building a convenient falsehood, we shield ourselves from the weight of accountability, from the consequences.
Pretending we don't have agency, even when we do.
Exactly. And then Jonathan Haidt's work, In the Righteous Mind, adds another layer of complexity here.
How so?
He argues that our moral reasoning often works backward. We have these immediate gut feelings, these intuitions.
Right and wrong, just bam.
Yeah, and then our rational brain kicks in to build a story, a justification for those feelings.
So it's not guiding us toward truth, it's
Yeah.
justifying the gut feeling.
Often, yes. His research suggests our moral compass isn't always this rational guide pointing north. It's more like a lawyer hired after the fact.
Huh.
Constructing a persuasive argument to support the verdict our emotions already handed down.
That makes self-deception especially dangerous in the moral realm then.
Extremely. Because we become incredibly good at rationalizing our own biases, our self-serving actions, and dressing them up as moral imperatives.
Wow. So
Yeah.
you get this fundamental tension between, say, Nietzsche saying, we have art so we don't die of the truth.
The need for illusion for survival.
Right. And then Sam Harris countering, basically, truth matters more than comfort.
It's this age-old battle, isn't it? Between comforting fictions we feel we need and the sort of uncompromising value of truth.
A perennial philosophical wrestling match.
With very real-world consequences. Nietzsche highlights the human need for illusion to make existence bearable, while Harris champions truth, even when it's deeply uncomfortable, for progress.
And you see this play out everywhere. Take religion, for instance. Believing in an afterlife, heaven, that offers immense comfort facing death.
Undeniably.
But, as the research suggests, that same belief system can also be twisted to justify really harmful actions.
Like wars fought in the name of faith. Or excluding people with different beliefs.
Exactly. Persecuting them.
That's a powerful example of how a meaning system designed for comfort can morph when combined with that unwavering self-belief and a rejection of other views.
It becomes a justification for intolerance.
Intolerance, even violence, against those outside the narrative. The comfort for the in-group can come at a devastating moral cost to the out-group.
Okay, so the key takeaway for the listener in this layer seems crucial. A lie that makes you feel good, but does so by erasing or diminishing or actively harming other people. That's not just a harmless delusion.
No, it's unethical. It weaponizes that initial self-deception.
We really need to constantly ask ourselves, is my deeply held meaning somehow blinding me to someone else's pain, their suffering?
Exactly. Our personal stories don't exist in a vacuum. We have a moral responsibility to check their impact beyond just us. If our meaning requires marginalizing or dehumanizing others,
And it's rotten at the core.
its very foundation is morally bankrupt, no matter how soothing it feels individually.
All right, let's pull back wider view now. Layer 3, systemic foresight. We've looked at the individual, the immediate ethics. What happens when these tendencies, especially the self-deceptive kind of meaning-making, scale up?
Right. What are the broader consequences beyond just one person's head?
Yeah.
This is where the true power and, frankly, the potential for large-scale harm really becomes clear. Individual self-deceptions rarely stay contained.
They spread.
They spread, they take root in groups, and they can ultimately shape entire systems, often with really negative consequences.
Okay, give me an example.
Think about someone who goes through something tough. They make sense of it by saying, this suffering made me stronger.
Okay, that could be a positive framing, resilience.
On an individual level, yeah, it can be powerful. But as the source material points out, that personal narrative can then sort of metastasize into this broader, maybe toxic belief. If you're not suffering, you're not growing.
Ah, I see. So suddenly there's this pressure.
Exactly. Societal pressure to embrace hardship, even when it's pointless or actively damaging. A personal coping tool becomes a system-level expectation.
And that fuels things like toxic work cultures,
Yeah.
grind culture.
Precisely. Glorifying burnout or that kind of spiritual bypassing where real pain gets dismissed as just, a lack of inner strength.
And the QAnon phenomena,
Hmm.
that's a stark, frankly terrifying example of this scaling up.
Absolutely chilling. You had individuals finding meaning in just random bits of information, constructing this incredibly elaborate, completely false narrative.
About shadowy figures, secret plots.
Right. And that meaning, however divorced from reality it was, had very real-world, violent repercussions.
It's a chilling illustration of how a powerful meaning, even a fabricated one, can be way more motivating than, like, a nuanced, complex truth.
It tragically highlights that human yearning for coherence, for control, especially when things feel uncertain or scary. People are drawn to narratives, regardless of truth sometimes.
If they offer understanding, belonging, purpose.
Exactly. Even a false sense of purpose can be incredibly motivating, sometimes more so than verifiable facts. QAnon really demonstrates that danger.
The research also mentions how within organizations this self-deception can breed really damaging stuff.
Oh, for sure. Individuals might rationalize unethical behavior saying, oh, it's for the good of the company.
Or the whole group just ignores warning signs.
Yeah, because facing uncomfortable truths about performance or the market or whatever, it's just harder. This collective self-deception can lead to a kind of organizational blindness.
Cutting corners, flawed strategies.
Right. Convincing themselves it'll all work out, leading to poor decisions, ethical breaches, potentially total failure.
And then at the biggest scale, society-wide.
Collective self-deception can be a powerful tool for maintaining systems of oppression.
Oh, yeah.
By convincing everyone, both the privileged and the marginalized, that the existing social order is somehow natural, or deserved, or maybe even divinely ordained.
So the inequalities just persist.
Exactly. Dominant narratives, often built on layers of historical self-deception, they perpetuate injustice by shaping how we see the world and our place in it. Challenging those deeply ingrained meanings is crucial for dismantling systemic inequalities.
So the sobering insight here is, meaning doesn't just live quietly in our heads.
Not at all.
It radiates out. It infects systems. It can scale individual lives into harmful policies, movements, even wars.
Precisely. We have a responsibility to be hyper-aware of the bigger implications of the meanings we embrace personally and collectively, and to keep asking, whose interests do these meanings actually serve?
Okay, let's dive deeper now. Layer 4, embodied insight. This shifts focus to our biology, our psychology, the ways our very being might predispose us to this self-deceptive meaning-making.
Right. This layer reminds us we aren't just, rational brains floating in jars. Our biology, our wiring plays a huge role in how we perceive reality, and often our systems prioritize safety over truth.
Survival first. Lisa Feldman Barrett's work on emotions seems key here. Emotions as predictions.
Exactly. If our brain predicts that facing a certain truth will be emotionally painful or maybe socially risky,
It steers us away.
it makes perfect sense that it might steer us away, or at least significantly tweak our perception of that truth.
So emotions aren't just reactions, they shape what we see.
They actively shape our experience. If a truth feels like a threat to our ego, our social standing, our safety, our brain might literally filter it out, or downplay it, or just reinterpret it to fit better, to feel safer.
And then you have the work on trauma. Peter Levine, Bessel van der Kolk.
Profound insights there. Their work shows how unprocessed pain can actually rewire our brains, fundamentally change how we perceive reality.
So in that context, making meaning around trauma, even if it involves some self-deception.
It can become a powerful coping mechanism, a kind of psychological painkiller, yeah, though potentially maladaptive in the long run.
Trauma shatters our assumptions about the world, right?
It can create deep fissures in our sense of self, our understanding. So meaning-making after trauma often serves a protective function, trying to create some coherence, some safety after overwhelming experiences.
And letting go of that meaning, even if it's self-deceptive.
It can feel terrifying, like a kind of ego death, because you're dismantling a core part of your identity, your hard-won coping strategies.
Evolutionary psychology also weighs in, doesn't it? suggesting self-deception might have evolved.
Yeah, the idea being it could enhance social cohesion and ultimately personal survival.
How would that work?
Well, if holding certain beliefs helps you fit into the group, gain trust, navigate social dynamics, then that belief might give you a survival advantage.
Regardless of whether it's actually true.
Right. It circles back to Trevor's idea of the convincing liar. If self-deception makes us more persuasive, fosters stronger bonds, it could definitely offer an edge in a highly social species like ours.
And neuroscience backs this up too. The brain's bias,
Yeah, research consistently shows confirmation bias. Our brains actively seek out and give more weight to information that fits what we already believe.
which powerfully reinforces self-deceptive patterns.
Yeah.
Makes it hard to break free.
It's the brain trying to be efficient, seeking consistency. It takes less energy to fit new info into existing frameworks than to constantly rebuild our core beliefs. But that bias creates echo chambers in our own minds
Making us resistant to challenging information.
and perpetuating self-deception.
So the crucial insight from this layer: self-deception isn't just a choice or a quirky habit.
No, it's deeper.
It's embedded in our nervous system,
Yeah.
shaped by evolution, maintained by how our brains work. Our biology is actively curating our reality.
Including what we perceive as truth. Yeah,
Exactly. Recognizing these deep predispositions is the first step towards maybe cultivating more self-awareness and mitigating the harm.
Okay, now we move into layer 5, human-centered design. This is where we get practical, almost like engineers, looking at how real, messy, irrational humans actually behave.
Not how we wish they behaved.
Right. This layer stresses grounding our understanding in the reality of human behavior, not some abstract ideal of rationality.
We need to accept that people are fundamentally driven by emotions, by needs for connection, status, by the power of stories and patterns, often much more than by pure logic.
Daniel Kahneman's System 1, System 2 work seems essential here.
Absolutely groundbreaking. He showed that most of our decisions, the snap judgments, the intuitive leaps, they come from that fast, emotional, subconscious System 1.
Exactly. Not the slow, deliberate, rational System 2. So, expecting ourselves or others to consistently deal with truth in a purely logical, unbiased way, it's probably unrealistic,
Our gut reactions often hold more sway than careful analysis.
which profoundly impacts how we form beliefs and make meaning. It's often colored by feelings, by immediate intuitions, not rigorous evaluation.
That example of posting dramatic breakup quotes on Instagram, it's a bit cringeworthy, but it illustrates this well.
How so?
It feels like processing emotions, like growth. We're crafting this narrative of resilience for ourselves and, the world.
Performing growth.
Right. But is it actual deep growth? Or is it more about performing the idea of growth for our network, maybe even for ourselves?
It highlights that performative dimension of meaning-making. We do things that signal a certain story about ourselves, externally and internally, even if the real transformation hasn't happened yet.
The feeling of growth, the validation, can be more powerful than the actual hard work.
Sometimes, yeah. The immediate reward is stronger.
So when we're trying to tackle this issue of self-deception in our lives or in systems,
Yeah, we have to factor in this reality, how people actually function.
right, interventions therapy, cultural shifts, system design, they need to be tailored to real human behavior with all the biases and emotions, not some idealized version.
Effective interventions have to work with the grain of human psychology, acknowledging our biases, our emotional drivers, our social needs. Trying to impose purely rational solutions on fundamentally non-rational beings is likely futile.
And the sources specifically call out biases like confirmation bias
Seeking out what we already believe.
and the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Where the less you know, the more confident you are. Ouch.
Yeah, these are significant fuel sources for self-deception, hardwired tendencies we have to consciously fight against.
They act as blind spots, making us stubbornly resistant to challenging info, fostering unwarranted overconfidence. Addressing self-deception means developing strategies to actively spot and overcome these cognitive limits.
So the blunt insight here is, if your idea of truth needs everyone to be perfectly rational all the time,
You're living in a fantasy.
yeah, meaning is like the social operating system. And like any software, it has bugs, vulnerabilities. They can become huge issues if we don't actively design systems that promote self-awareness and critical thinking.
Exactly. We need to design our personal habits, our social structures, our organizations to encourage questioning assumptions, to actively seek out diverse views, to foster openness to being wrong. That's crucial.
Okay, let's navigate to layer 6, risk and resilience. Here we think about what happens when our carefully built meanings, maybe the self-deceptive ones, get challenged by reality, when the unexpected happens.
This layer explores the fragility of meaning systems built on shaky ground, on wishful thinking or denial. What happens when the stories we've built are suddenly contradicted by events?
The shattered assumptions theory really hits this. Trauma happens when our core beliefs about the world, about our safety, our place.
When they're suddenly violently upended.
It shows just how fragile, untested meanings can be.
When those fundamental assumptions shatter, it can cause profound distress. Disorientation, loss of meaning. It underlines why we need meaning systems that aren't brittle, but robust, adaptable, able to integrate new, even difficult information.
Which contrasts nicely with Nassim Taleb's concept of anti-fragility.
Right, building systems and maybe personal meaning so they actually benefit from chaos, get stronger through stress.
Rather than just resisting it.
Anti-fragile meanings can learn and evolve from adversity. They don't just bounce back, they emerge stronger. But that requires a willingness to question and revise beliefs when faced with disruption.
The sources warn that if a story, a meaning we hold dear, just completely collapses under pressure.
It probably wasn't a very robust truth to begin with, more like a fragile mental construct.
And they give pointed examples, like believing suffering is always virtuous.
It can lead to tolerating abuse.
Yeah.
Or believing your group is always right.
Can lead to ignoring or even justifying atrocities committed by that group. Tragic. These examples show the danger of rigid, unquestioned beliefs. When meaning turns into dogma, it can blind us, erode empathy, lead to really harmful outcomes.
For ourselves and others.
And then there's overconfidence, a potent form of self-deception linked to financial crises, organizational collapses.
When individuals or groups think they know more or have more control than they really do, it can pave the way for disaster.
Creates a dangerous illusion of certainty.
Leads to failing to assess risks properly, ignoring alternatives, not preparing for downsides. It highlights the need for intellectual humility, acknowledging the limits of our knowledge.
So the core insight from layer 6.
Yeah.
Meaning that only works when things are good. That's a liability.
A big one.
True resilience demands we acknowledge uncertainty, proactively prepare for things to go wrong, and cultivate adaptive meaning systems.
Systems that can withstand disruption and actually learn and evolve from it. Meaning-making should be ongoing adaptation, not clinging inflexibly to static beliefs despite evidence.
Okay, finally, layer 7, execution engine. This is where we move beyond analysis to practical steps. Actionable strategies. How do we actively confront and adapt our own meaning-making?
Right. Translating understanding into concrete actions. Fostering greater self-awareness, more accurate perceptions, more resilient and ethical ways of navigating the world.
The sources suggest starting with radical self-inquiry.
Constantly questioning, rigorously asking, is this story I tell myself actually true? Or is it just serving a purpose, maybe just comfort?
That takes real honesty, courage.
A deep commitment to honesty with ourselves, willingness to examine cherished beliefs, challenge assumptions even when it's uncomfortable or threatens our identity. It's about cultivating intellectual humility, pursuing clarity relentlessly.
Then there's this idea, narrative prototyping.
Actively experimenting with and revising the stories we tell ourselves about our lives.
Like narrative therapy, reauthoring our stories.
Exactly. With more honesty, more agency, more context. Narrative therapy shows how powerful our stories are in shaping who we are. By consciously examining and revising them, we can break free from limiting beliefs, reclaim agency, build more empowering meanings.
And the importance of multi-perspective integration.
Actively engaging with viewpoints that contradict ours. Cultivating the ability to hold conflicting perspectives without needing to immediately dismiss one or resolve the tension.
That's key for breaking out of echo chambers.
Absolutely. Genuinely engaging with diverse, challenging views exposes our biases, broadens understanding, leads to a more nuanced grasp of reality.
The sources also point to practices like mindfulness, CBT.
Incredibly useful tools for cultivating awareness of our thought patterns, the automatic assumptions, the subtle ways we might be deceiving ourselves without realizing.
Mindfulness helps observe thoughts non-judgmentally.
Creates space for self-awareness. And CBT offers practical techniques to identify and challenge those maladaptive thought patterns that often prop up self-deceptive beliefs.
And finally, for organizations, for systems.
Taking concrete steps to reduce collective self-deception. Implementing robust feedback mechanisms that value honest input.
Fostering a culture of transparency,
Yeah.
where difficult truths can be addressed without fear.
Exactly. Creating an environment where criticism is constructive, diverse views are sought, mistakes are learning opportunities, not things to hide. That's essential for organizational self-awareness, ethics, and resilience.
So the big insight from this final layer,
Mhm.
we don't need to destroy meaning. That's probably impossible, maybe not even good.
No, the challenge is to de-idolize it.
See it as a tool, not absolute truth. Learn to use it consciously, intentionally.
And be constantly willing to update it, revise it, as we learn more, as the world changes. Combating self-deception isn't a one-off fix. It's an ongoing, active process, demands effort, adaptation.
Cultivating lifelong critical self-reflection, commitment to truth, even uncomfortable truth, humility about what we don't know.
Exactly, that's the work.
So wrapping this up, it seems clear that lying to ourselves is, well, surprisingly common, deeply human, often driven by that need for meaning in a chaotic world.
Yeah, not necessarily malice, more often a primal desire for coherence, comfort, control.
But as we've gone through layer by layer, those unexamined lies, those cozy fictions we cling to,
They can easily morph from helpful coping tools into restrictive cages, limiting our understanding, potentially leading to harm for us and for others.
which leaves us with some final, maybe unsettling questions for listeners to really sit with.
Go on.
Is the meaning you've built around your life truly healing you, helping you grow? Or is it mostly a shield, protecting you from realities you maybe need to face?
Does it clarify reality or buffer you from it?
Exactly. Does it help you see clearly or just insulate you?
Because ultimately, meaning is a tool. It's not inherent, unchangeable truth, and maybe the most dangerous meaning.
Is the one we never question.
The one we accept implicitly without any real scrutiny.
Yeah. So our challenge to you, the listener, think deeply about the stories you tell yourself. Are they really serving you long term? Are they inclusive? Can they withstand reality's curveballs?
Build narratives intentionally. Stay open to revising them. Keep a healthy dose of skepticism, even about your deepest beliefs.
And if this deep dive sparks some uncomfortable but maybe necessary reflections,
That's probably a good sign.
yeah, share this exploration. Talk about it with someone else who might benefit from looking at their own assumptions, their own meanings.
Let's keep the conversation going. Foster that culture of critical thinking, that courageous pursuit of truth.
This has been The Deep Dive.